Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Jermaine, and in this video series we're going to be looking at the React.js documentation. And what we're going to do is we're going to be going through some of the React examples on the homepage, and we'll see how we can implement that using the conventions of the Dart language. So using Dart, we are able to interoperate with client-side libraries that are written in JavaScript, which is because the Dart team have a package called JS, which allows us to interoperate essentially with libraries that have been written in JavaScript on the client side. So in a similar vein, I did a similar video in Vue.js, and in this in particular, we're going to essentially be doing the same thing, but we're going to be covering React.js. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to start by bootstrapping a new project using the stagehand package. So we can do stagehand web simple. So what this will do is just generate the files and folders we need for a web-based project. And if you don't have stagehand installed and you want to install it, just do pub global activate stagehand, and that will get you the stagehand package. So now that we've generated the folder and files for our project, we can just do a pub get to update our dependencies. But before we update our dependencies, we need to go to our pubspec.yaml file and then uncomment this block, and we need to import the JS package. So it's 0.6.0. So we need to import the JS package. So I'll save this file, and then I'll run pubget. And what pubget does is it would essentially look at our dependencies and dev dependencies listed in this file, and it will go to the pub management repository to retrieve those packages. As you would expect, I assume. So let's wait for it to finish. And once our packages have been updated, we can test that this is all working by running webdev serve. And I will enable live reloading. So once that's ready, we can visit this URL in the browser, and that should give us this message: your Dart app is running. Okay, so we've got our basic example working. We have the JS package installed. So now what we will proceed to do is in our web directory, let's actually create a new file in here, and we will call it app.dart. So in here is where we'll be using the JS library to hook into various React methods. So the way it works is we start our file by declaring the JS annotation, and we need to give it a library name. So this library will be called React Interop. And to get rid of the red squiggly line, we need to import our package. So it will be js/js.dart. And then essentially what we'll do here is we need to know what how exactly to interface with React itself. So before we do that, we need to actually import React into our index.html file. So if we go to the documentation, there is a part of the documentation that gives us these two files to import React into our project. So that is React and React DOM. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'll go back to my file here, and I will paste it here at the top, just right before our main.dart.js file. So this file is automatically generated based on the code we have in our main.dart file. So we wouldn't have to worry too much about that. So let me save that. And then let's just try and run this again. Okay, let me refresh the page again. Okay, so got our Dart app running. And so one thing I wanted to do is confirm we have React. So if I type in React in the console, we get an object containing various methods and properties. So methods like create element, for instance, we're going to need. And we can confirm we have React DOM, which also is an object containing various methods such as render. Okay, so we have React installed here. It's loading, it's working. So I am going to minimize this terminal and come to our app.dart file. So the first thing we need is to interrupt with React. So I'll do that by using the JS annotation, and then I am going to declare an external property essentially, or an external hook to React itself. So external hook, and then essentially will be external get React. And let me zoom this in a bit so we can see it a lot clearer and get rid of that. Okay, so this would essentially return our React namespace. So if I save this and then I come to main.dart and then I import app.dart, and let's say I print, do a console log or console dir React, and then I save this file, and then I inspect the console. We see that the object is logging out. So already we're successfully able to access our React object, which is part of the global window object. Okay, so I'm going to come back to app.dart, and then what we need to do essentially is, well, I'm going to start by trying to render an element onto the screen. So with React, to render a HTML element on the screen, we need to use the create element method. So to do that, I will start by casting this to an interface that I named React interface. So it's not created yet. We're going to do that shortly. And then immediately we'll do that now. So we'll create an anonymous class called React interface. And in this anonymous class, we would have, we'll define external getters to our create element function. So create element, yeah, I think it's just called create element, isn't it? Our create element function, which is of type function. And instead of using a function directly, I'm going to use a a type def or a type definition. So it's called create element fn. And then right after that, I'm going to declare create element fn. So create element fn, which will be equal to a function which takes in a couple of parameters. So the first parameter would be a name. Second will be an attribute parameter, so it will be an object essentially, and the third one would be a list. So that way. Okay. So now that we have a hook into the create element function, let's define one for React DOM's render function. So I'll do the same here. Mark it as a external, and I'll call it React DOM interface. Then getter, then it's called React DOM, and same thing here. We'll create an anonymous class, call it React DOM interface, and then we will declare an external function called render. And this render would also take a type definition that we'll call DOM render function. And then we'll define this here. So DOM render function will take in a function that accepts a dynamic element, and then we need to define essentially a context. So this context would be the DOM node that we're rendering our React components in. So this would be of type element, and we get this element from the .html library. So let's import it. Yeah, okay. So let's actually try and use this now. I'm going to go back to main.dart. We've imported app.dart already. And if we go in our HTML, we have a div with an ID of output. So we're going to be rendering our React element in here. So if I go back to main.dart, what we can do is I'll get rid of that. I'll create a variable called context, and in there is a query selector to the output element. And then here we should be able to do React DOM, and we're able to call the render method. And in our render method, that will take in a React component. So let's see, we'll take in a React element rather. So we can do React create element, and then the element would be a heading 1. And then for attributes, I'll pass in null for now. And then the third parameter that goes in here would be children, I believe. Yeah, so a list of children. So I can do can do your Dart app is running. So let's try running this now. And let's see why this is not working. Okay, so it requires two. All right, the render function requires two arguments. So the second argument was our context. So let's save this and run this, and yeah, it looks like it's working. Got your Dart app is running. So let me inspect this to ensure it's actually rendering in a header one. And as we can see, it's working. Okay, that's good. So far we've we're interoperating with the React namespace under the window object. We're interfacing with React DOM, which is also under our window object. And then we're casting it to these two interfaces. So our React interface, essentially where we defined a getter which hooks into the create element function. And that create element function has a type definition. So this type definition essentially describes the signature for this create element function, which takes in a name, an object containing attributes, and a list of children elements. And then we also, in a similar vein, we defined a React DOM interface to describe this React DOM object, which takes in an anonymous class. And in this anonymous class, which is essentially our interface for React DOM, we defined an external getter to our render method, which is part of React DOM. And then that is also casted to this type definition, which is a signature function, which takes in an element, and then it takes in a context. So what I want to do next is to allow us to define a list of attributes for our heading 1 element. So one of the ways we can do it is because, like I said, Dart maps are opaque in JavaScript, we can define something like this and use getters to define the different properties we can define. So I did something similar in the Vue.js video, but I want to do something a lot easier, which is in the form of a utility that comes in the JS package. So it's called js_util.dart. And what this does is it gives us a couple of functions. So what we can do is we can create a make.js object function, and there are some utilities. There's I think 2 utilities we can use. Yeah, we can use 2 utilities. So one of the utility functions is a JavaScript object. So we can do new object. So this essentially creates a JavaScript object that we can work with. And then this make.js object will take in a map. And I'll just call it Dart map. And what we're going to do here is we're going to loop over each of our keys. So I'll call it key here, and Dart map.keys. And then for each of our keys, we're going to call another top level function called setProperty. So that's part of the JS utils library. So the first argument is our JS object, and the second is the name. So I called it key, and then our value would be that map key. So once that's done, we just return our JS object. So just to cover again what is happening, we defined a new object, a new JavaScript object, and then well, let me go back a bit. So we defined this function which takes in a dot map object, and then in here we are instantiating a JavaScript object, and then we are extracting the key and value pairs from our dart map and essentially plugging it into our JavaScript object. And once that's done, we simply return this JavaScript object. So in fact, the type it returns is we're just using object generically because as this description says, object is the base class for all Dart objects. So I'll just do that. Okay, so what this now means is that we're able to go back to our main.dart file, and in here I'm going to use this JS object. So here we can define an ID. I'll just call it title, whichever. So if we refresh the page and I inspect this heading 1, we see that it's added our ID of title. Okay, so that's good. So the final thing that I want us to do before we end this video is to create a React component. And using React in Dart, we can't do it by extending React.component because the Dart.js package doesn't interface with ES6 based solutions. So that won't be a problem though, because if we go to the documentation, there is a section that describes how to how we use React without ES6. Which, long story short, we need to import a module called create React class, and that provides a top-level function that allows us to inject a JavaScript object with a render function, and we will be able to use the other lifecycle methods in here too. So to import create React class module, we can go to jsdeliver.com, and if we search for create React class, and you click the result that says create React class, it will bring you to the screen, and we want to import the minified version specifically. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to come back here, go to the index file, and after these two React imports, we'll paste that here. So saving that now gives us access to create React class. We're not going to see anything different yet, but what that means is we can now come to our app.dart file and then interface with it. So it's not $@ and then we will create an external function, and then it's called create React class. So we can pass in an object. I'll call it obj, and okay, maybe get rid of the get. Okay, so now what we need to be able to do, if we go back to the example in the documentation, so essentially we're going to be replicating this using this. So if we look, create React class, it takes in a render function, which is, well, render is a method which returns a React element. But one of the things we need to be able to do is to pass in properties, and be able to extract these properties in our render function. So here's how we're going to do it. So for our create React class, well, this bit is fine. We'll come to our main.dart file, and then we're going to create our React class or our React component. We'll call it greeting, like the documentation showed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call our create React class top level function. We'll pass in an object or a map if you like, but we won't pass in the map straight away. Actually, we'll call our make.js object helper, and then we'll pass in a map. And then this map will take in a render method, and this render function will take in a React element. And then in our React element, we will render a heading 1 element. It will take no attributes. And then in our children, we'll say hello. And for now, I'll just put Jermaine. So that should do it for us. And I will save this here. Let me clean up the indentation, so I'll put a comma here to improve the indentation. I'll put one here as well. Let's see if it does. Okay, it doesn't make any difference. So now we can come back to our render function, and then in here, instead of putting h1 as a string, we'll pass in our greeting component. And a change that I did earlier on in order for this to work is if we come to our app.dart, initially I had set the create element function to expect a string, but because we can pass in strings as well as components, I set it to dynamic essentially. So which means that we're able to pass in our greeting component. So if I save this here and wait for the page to reload, as expected, it says hello Jermaine. Okay, so the final thing we need to do is to be able to we're passing in parameters to our component, and we need to be able to capture it through this.props. So the way we'll do that is we'll come back to app.dart, and down here our create React class will define a React class interface for it. So I'll just call it React class interface, and then I will create that. So create that here, and then call it React class interface, and this interface will declare a getter and called props that way. So that's the first thing we'll do, and then the second thing we are going to do is go back to main, and then in here we will wrap this function in a utility that comes with the .js package. So package JS, and it's js.dart. And then this utility, this top level function we can extract is called allow interop capture this. So this will allow this Dart we allow this dart function to interoperate with the JavaScript side, but we're also able to capture the this. It allows us to capture the reference to this, the this keyword, which is a reference to our React component. So in here, we're able to capture it, and I'll call it self. And as far as the type goes, it is a React class interface. And let me just put a comma here. Okay. So now we're able to do hello, and then using string interpolation, I can do self.props. And then I can extract our name from here. So let me save that. And of course, we'll get an error because we need to define our name. That's Jermaine. And let's try this. Okay, we're getting some errors. Let's see what's happening. No such method. Okay, so because this is on the JavaScript side, we can use the get property function. So that is in our JS util library. So what we'll do is essentially we'll call the get property function, and then our first parameter is self.props, and then the second is the name of that property. So if I call that and save it, and the page refreshes as expected, we get hello Jermaine. So if I change this to John and save it, it should say hello John. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have a working solution. So just to recap for the last time, we imported the create React class library into our project here, and this allows us to create a React class or a React component without ES6 syntax. And then in here we pass in a make.js object function so that it will convert our map containing options into a JavaScript object. We define a render method which takes in a function, and we've essentially wrapped this function with allow interrupt capture this. So we're able to pass a dart function into JavaScript and also be able to capture the value of this keyword. So that would be passed in as the first parameter to this closure essentially, and we're able to use it in here. And then using the get property function, that comes from our JS util library, we're able to pass in self.props, and then we're able to extract the name of the key we want. Okay, and moving on to, and we're able to do self.props because we've casted self to the React class interface, which we defined here in this file itself. So as a result of that, we're able to get props from it. In fact, now thinking about it, I can potentially do without these bits. So let me save this and make sure it's still running as expected. Okay, so it still works. So it is a lot simpler. And so I want to do one more thing before I end this video. So I mean, looking at this, we're using make.js object perhaps a bit too much, so I am going to abstract this bit away. And the way I'll do that is, if I come back to app.dart, I'm going to call this underscore create React class. And then because I've added this underscore, that means we're not able to access, running this will throw an error because underscore create React class doesn't exist on the window object. It's create React class. But what we can do is to tell the JS package that we want this function to call create React class. So this will solve our problem. And the second thing we need to do is to actually define create React class, which takes in a map, and then it will return create React class, and then I'll do make.js object and pass in our map. In fact, I'll call it Dart map. So let me save this and let's try it again and see if it works. Okay, and we have an error, which is because we need to come to our main.dart file and get rid of this bit. So let's save it again. Let me clear that. Okay, and we have hello John. Okay, so this works for us perfectly. So I'm going to end this video here. This has been particularly interesting for me, myself exploring this. Of course, in a real life scenario, there are frameworks in Dart to build single page applications. There's Angular Dart, there's also Vue Dart, and there's also an implementation of React in Dart, which is essentially a wrapper around React.js. So someone has already gone through the gone through the trouble to implement all of these definitions for it. So if you go on pub.dartlang.org and search for React, you should come across it. Same with Vue Dart, or in fact just use Angular Dart, because the Dart team essentially I've been working on that, and they use that internally at Google as well. So I mean, if you want something that is a bit more robust, I'll just go with Angular Dart, really. But I'm going to end this video here. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If you would like to see more videos on Dart, server-side, client-side, full-stack Dart, why don't you consider subscribing? So click on the subscribe button and click the bell notification icon so that you know when new videos are released. Thank you.